You graduated top of your class. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell your story later. They skip that part. They go straight to the other things. The things that make better headlines. But the truth is you were good, genuinely good. The kind of surgeon professors point to when they want to show students what focus looks like. Steady hands. Calm under pressure. Built for this. You did 2 years in a public hospital in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Not because you had to, because you believed in it. You told yourself that medicine was a calling, not a career. You worked 14-hour shifts. You stitched up farmers and construction workers and old women who couldn't afford the private clinics across town. You slept on a cot in the break room 3 nights a week. You were doing good work. That's what makes everything that comes after so hard to explain. It starts on a Tuesday. You're finishing a double shift when a man walks into the ER. Not as a patient. He's too calm for that. Too clean. He moves through the chaos of the waiting room like he owns the floor, which, you'll later understand, he effectively does. He finds you specifically, not the attending, not the senior resident. You. He says a friend needs help. Private help. He says your name like he's known it for years. He slides a card across the counter. Nothing on it but a phone number. He tells you the pay is better than anything the hospital will ever offer you. You don't call that night. You call 3 days later, when you find out the hospital is cutting staff and your contract is one of the ones not being renewed. The first job is almost clinical in its simplicity. They take you to a house on the edge of the city. Nice neighborhood. High walls. Security cameras on every corner. A man is laid out on a kitchen table. Gunshot wound to the thigh. Clean entry, no exit. The femoral artery is intact. You can tell immediately. He's in pain, but he's not dying. You remove the bullet. You close the wound. You wrap it properly and leave instructions for aftercare. It takes 40 minutes. When you're done, a woman in the doorway hands you an envelope. You open in the car. 8,000 pesos. More than you'd make in 2 weeks at the hospital. You tell yourself it's a one-time thing. It isn't a one-time thing. The calls start coming every week. Then twice a week. You learn the protocol quickly. Midnight pickups. Blindfold optional, but they prefer it. Safe houses that rotate locations. Patients who don't give their names and don't ask yours. You patch up bullet wounds. You set broken bones. You treat infections that have been festering too long. Because walking into a hospital means walking into a police report. At first you keep count. You tell yourself when you hit 10 jobs, you'll stop. Then 20. Then 50. You stop counting after a while. The money is extraordinary. You pay off your student debt in 4 months. You send money to your mother in Guadalajara. You put a down payment on a small apartment. For the first time in your adult life, you are not drowning. You tell yourself the patients would have found someone worse if not you. You tell yourself you're reducing harm. You are a professional. You are controlled. You are not like them. That's the second thing people skip when they tell your story. 6 months in, you meet the man they call El Medico, not a doctor. The name is ironic. He is the cartel's head of logistics, the person who decides where resources go, who gets help, who doesn't. He summons you to a compound outside the city. Real security this time. Men with rifles at the gate. Dogs trained to be silent. He offers you a formal arrangement. Retainer pay. Monthly. More than your annual hospital salary. A fully equipped medical suite in a compound 40 minutes from the city. A support nurse. Trained, capable, no questions asked. Protection for you and anyone connected to you. All he asks in return is exclusivity. You work for them, and only them. You're available on call. Always. You do not speak about your work. You do not treat anyone outside the organization without permission. You ask what happens if you say no. He smiles. He tells you that you are, of course, completely free to decline. He doesn't need to say anything else. You sign nothing. There is no contract. There's only the understanding that exists between two people when one of them has all the power and is being polite about it. You say yes. The suite is impressive. You'll admit that. Real surgical lights. Proper anesthesia equipment. A supply chain for medications that somehow never runs dry. The nurse, a woman named Claudia, is the most competent medical professional you've worked alongside in years. You never ask her history. She never offers it. For a long stretch, it is almost routine. You treat the soldiers, the couriers, the mid-level operators who catch bullets during territory disputes. Occasionally the wives and children of senior figures who can't be taken to legitimate hospitals without drawing attention. You develop a rhythm. You become known internally as someone reliable, precise, professional. They start calling you El Cirujano, the surgeon. You tell yourself this is fine. You are a tool being used. You maintain your identity. You are still the person who graduated top of your class, still the person who believes in medicine as a calling. You are wrong, but it takes time for you to understand that. The night everything changes is a Wednesday. They bring in a man around 2 o'clock in the morning. Multiple gunshot wounds. Abdomen, chest, left shoulder. He's been moved twice before reaching you, and he's lost a dangerous amount of blood. Claudia already has a 4 running by the time you scrub in. You work for 3 hours. You save him. When you finally step back from the table, the man standing in the doorway isn't one of the regular handlers. He's older, quieter, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The men around him don't speak unless spoken to. They don't move unless directed. You know who he is before anyone says his name. Everyone in Sinaloa knows who he is. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he nods once, a small deliberate movement, and leaves without a word. The handler tells you afterward. That nod means something. That nod means you are no longer a contractor. You are an asset. You don't sleep that night. The difference between a contractor and an asset is everything. A contractor gets paid and goes home. An asset belongs. The compound becomes your primary residence. Your apartment in the city is maintained. They pay the rent, keep the lights on, make sure it looks lived in. But you are rarely there. Your world shrinks to the compound, the suite, the rotation of patients that never fully stops. Claudia notices a change in you before you do. She doesn't say anything directly, but one evening, when the suite is empty and you're both cleaning up after a long case, she places a hand briefly on your forearm. She looks at you. Her eyes carry something, recognition, maybe, or warning. You understand then that she has been here longer than you, that she knows exactly what you are becoming. A year in, they ask you to do something different, not treatment, training. They want you to teach a small group of men basic surgical techniques, field medicine, how to keep someone alive long enough to reach you when you're not reachable. You refuse. It's the first time you refused anything. The handler doesn't react. He simply says he'll pass the message along. He leaves. 3 days later, your mother calls you. She mentions that 2 men came to her neighborhood, asked the neighbors about your family. Very polite, she says, very well dressed. She didn't know who they were. You call the handler back. You say you'll do the training. This is the moment you stop lying to yourself. Not the first job. Not signing on for the retainer. Not even saving the man whose name you recognized. This moment. This phone call. Because up until now you could construct the story a certain way. Circumstances, coercion, economic necessity, harm reduction. You could arrange the facts into something that resembled a person making difficult choices under impossible pressure. But you made this call because you chose to protect yourself. Full stop. No other reason. You sit with that for a long time. The training sessions run for 6 weeks. You are methodical, precise. You teach wound packing, tourniquet application, basic airway management. You keep it clinical. You tell yourself you are teaching skills that could save anyone, that these same techniques exist in every combat medicine course taught to soldiers in every army in the world. The men learn quickly. They are serious. Disciplined. You are good at this. That's the part that disturbs you most. 2 years pass. You no longer think about the hospital in Culiacan. You no longer think about the farmers and the construction workers and the old women in the waiting room. That version of you feels like someone else's memory, something you read about once and almost remember clearly. You think about your mother, about whether she is safe, about the weight of the guarantee you were given, and how much it actually means. You think about Claudia sometimes, who disappeared 6 months ago without explanation. Another nurse works beside you now. He is competent. He does not make eye contact. You think about the man who handed you a card with a phone number on it in the emergency room. How ordinary it looked. How impossible it would have seemed, then, to trace a straight line from that moment to this one. You stand in the surgical suite at 3 o'clock in the morning. The lights are on. The instruments are laid out. Another patient is being brought in. You pull on your gloves. You think about the person you were when you believed medicine was a calling. And then you begin, because this is your life now, not the one you chose, the one that chose you.